devices. But like my dot quotes, they are pure functional quotes. And that means that they abstract from linguistic materials. In the second place, itty, hood, and ness obviously form singular terms. And what I'm suggesting is that the singular terms they form are not names, but are what? Distributive singular terms. Now, Platonism is built on the notion that itty, hood, and ness words, if they're taken seriously as singular terms, must be construed as what? Names. Now, what I'm proposing is that we can do justice to their singular termishness without accepting them as names. And of course, they don't come to us blowing bugles and saying we are names. They simply present themselves to us as singular terms. And I'm suggesting that if we reconstruct them as distributive singular terms, then we can understand their peculiar role. Now let me draw a distinction between two meanings of objectivity, or two degrees of objectivity. First of all, there is objectivity in an absolute sense. Something is absolutely objective if it's independent of mind. Now, an idealist, of course, would deny that there is anything absolutely objective. I mean, let me put it this way. By contrast, let me contrast absolute objectivity with what I will call the weaker sense of objectivity, which I will call publicness or intersubjectivity. Obviously, institutions are objective, but of course they're not absolutely objective, because if there were no persons, there would be no institutions. The existence of institutions involves the existence of persons and of minds. Now, what I want to suggest is that words like triangularity, circularity, justice, and so on look as though they were absolutely objective, because in point of fact, they obviously don't refer, or at least don't appear to refer, to our own language or to any particular language. And therefore, the temptation is to think of them as non-linguistic, period. And what I want to suggest is that it's what gives them their peculiar character is not their being absolutely objective, but their being public in the sense of applying to expressions in any number of languages, indeed any of a family of languages which contains a certain kind of function. All right, so according to this analysis, when we say that "und" in German means "and," we can also say "und" in German stands for "andness," and this comes down to the same. In other words, when you press the analysis to get over here, "und" in German stands for "and." This comes out again to mean "und" in German included in dot quote "and." So what I'm suggesting then is that to say what a word stands for is also to classify it. But we're going to see that "stands for" is a specialized word, is specialized even further than "means," because "stands for" is introduced by logicians to contrast with "denotes," where it is appropriate. Now, as a matter of fact, philosophers tend not to think of "und" as standing for anything, because they're so concerned with that contrast between intension and extension, and "und" obviously doesn't have any extension. All right. When I say, for example, that Dreieckig in German stands for triangularity, according to this analysis, this is to classify, this has the effect of the Dreieckig is the German triangular. Triangular. stands for turns out not to be a relation at all, if this reconstruction is correct. And again, the key to the reconstruction is to see triangularity not as a purported name, to recognize its character as a singular term, and to view it as a way of classifying functionally linguistic expressions. So that according to this account, then, both means and stands for are specialized forms of the copula. Now, I said that to classify, to say what a word stands for is to classify it functionally. But now, what is the function of Dryaki? You see, one is often tempted to say, well, I grant that the word Dryaki has a function, but surely its function is to stand for triangularity, and to get into circle here, obviously. Now, there are two ways in which you can give an explanation. You can explain to someone the function of a word. For example, supposing, to use an analogy, I were to go down to Texas where LBJ is playing chess, and I might say, as I see a Cadillac steaming by from County A to County B, I might say, what's that? And somebody might say, that's a king. That's a king. Now you see, I've told you in a sense what its function is, but of course I've done it by giving you a classifier, which classifies functionally. In order to explain in another sense what that is, I would have to say, what is the sort of thing that can go from county to county one at a time, and then give him the rules of Texas chess, LBJ chess. Again, supposing I were to ask, what is the function of a pawn? Well, it would be unilluminating to answer the question by saying the function of a pawn is to play the pawn role. The function of the pawn is to play the pawn. Now, what I'm suggesting is that to say that the function of Dryaki is to stand for triangularity, to say that would be to give a stone in place of a bread, just as someone were to say, what is the function of a pawn? The function of a pawn is to play the pawn role. Is to play the pawn. There are many ways in which we have specialized copulas, and playing, as for example in Texas chess, Cadillacs play the king. Play there is a copula, and in effect, in Texas chess, Cadillacs play the king is equivalent to in Texas chess, Cadillacs are kings. So it's the statement that the function of Dryaki is to stand for triangularity is, as I said, unilluminating in a way in which it would be which would contrast with the illuminating way of discussing the axiomatic structure which governs the correct use of the word triangular. And I'm going to be discussing using the example of triangular in a number of ways, and ultimately to clarify the notion of conceptual change. Let me illustrate this point again, because it's a crucial one. Supposing I say that uns in German stands for andness, and then I explain to you that's really giving you a classification of the German word uns, telling you that uns in German are dot und and. And then you say, well, that's a functional classification. Well, what function does the word uns in German play? Well, I might say, well, it plays the and function. But that wouldn't be very illuminating unless you can rehearse your word and know how you use it. And in effect, then, what I could do more explicitly is to tell you the basic rules in accordance with which the connective and functions in logic. In other words, the cache for a functional classification ultimately consists in laying down what the rules are in terms of which one evaluates